What is greatness? What is greatness and how do we define it? It's interesting. There's this phrase, the GOAT or goated. In fact, I heard Lewis this morning playfully, I think it was to Dakota, say, "Oh man, you're goated." Or at school, I walk around the hallway and the former fifth grade, now sixth graders will see me and, "Oh, Mr. Gilbert, he's the GOAT." I'm like, what does that mean? You know? And it stands for the greatest of all time. And I'm like, I don't really know if you think I'm the greatest teacher of all time. You didn't act that way last year when I had you. But there's this idea that they're trying to imply the greatest of all time. In different sectors or different fields or different arenas, if you will, there's the conversation of who's the GOAT, who's the greatest of all time. Michael Jordan, Michael Phelps, Tom Brady, Tiger Woods, Simone Biles, Wayne Gretzky, Serena Williams, Muhammad Ali, Messi, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Picasso, Van Gogh, Shakespeare, Mark Twain, Charles Dickens, Mozart, the Beatles, Michael Jackson. Apparently, if you have the name Michael, you're set, right? Elvis Presley, Madonna, Taylor Swift, Whitney Houston, Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, Rockefeller, Ford, Houdini. If we're talking the Christian world, Spurgeon, Luther, Whitefield, Wesley, Edwards. These are all names that, depending on the field you're looking at, would be considered the GOATs, the greatest of all time. Like, even just throwing out their last names, a lot of us can fill in their first names because they're so recognized, no matter what you think about sports or what you think about music or what you think about art, like, you know these names. Why? Because for most people, they're the GOAT. So the second question is, how do we measure? How do we define greatness? And again, regardless of what field it's in, it's usually by two things. One, accolades and talent. Like, do they have the measurements, the markers? Like, I'm not a Tom Brady fan. I'm not a Patriots fan, but it's hard to argue against his greatness in that sport because of the hardware sitting on his shelves, right? Doesn't matter what you think about LeBron or Michael Jordan, like, Jordan never lost in the finals. He's batting 1,000 every time he gets in the finals. Like, there's this idea of measurements based on accolades and talent. But is that how Jesus measures greatness? I would like to propose absolutely not. Jesus has a very different and, quite frankly, better way of measuring greatness, and that's what we're going to look at this morning. The sermon in a sentence is this: Jesus has come to call us to follow him on the path to greatness in his kingdom, which is marked with suffering, service, and sacrifice. Suffering, service, and sacrifice. This is kind of the measuring rod in which Jesus uses to mark and define greatness. 3 S's. Hopefully it's easy for us to remember. Suffering, service, sacrifice. Not only is this the measuring rod in which he uses to measure us, it's actually his own standard for himself, which is what I love about him. We're going to see that actually played out in the text. Mark chapter 10, 35 through 45, we see this is on the tail end of Jesus for the third time in the book of Mark, revealing and prophesying about his own death. That's important context to know because of what comes out of the mouths of these two disciples is that more crazy and audacious in light of the fact that Jesus had just said, literally, the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him. He's talking about himself. And then we pick up in verse 35. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him being Jesus, and said to him, "Listen, teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." That's a funny sentence. It's a funny question. In light of, one, what Jesus had just said, and two, who he is. They've been hanging out with Jesus for quite some time. They know that he's more than just a teacher at this point. And yet they ask him this pretty audacious question. It's like, hey, Jesus, do whatever I ask you right now. It's kind of like Aladdin in the genie, right? With the lamp. They're like, hey, I'm going to ask you to grant me one of my wishes. That's kind of the framework in which this question seems to be asked. Why did they approach Jesus this way? It's because they weren't still clear on why he had come. They weren't sure exactly, even though Jesus had spelled it out so many times, like why he had really come. And yet Jesus, in the midst of this pretty audacious question, takes time not to condemn these two men, but to bring clarity and to then call them. I love this about Jesus. We can get it wrong and do get it wrong all the time. And yet Jesus' disposition towards us is not one of condemnation. It's one towards clarity and calling. Not clarity and calling in the sense of like, we often think of like, whoa, it's all about me. No, it's calling us into the greatness and the better life that he has for us. And so right here, he does this. He actually takes time to bring clarity to what true greatness is and then call them into it on his terms, not their own. He's not our genie, and how we approach him really matters. I want to make that very clear. They approach him in a wrong way that we should take heed and warning from, that we should not approach Jesus this way, and yet he's still very kind to them. But know this, Jesus is not our genie. May we not pray to him, talk about him in such a way that it leads us or others to believe that. Verse 36, and he said to them, Jesus, this is his response. Jesus addresses their statement with this question: what do you want me to do for you? And they said to him, grant us to sit at one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. Jesus is kind enough to entertain their proposal, even though it's from a place of mixed motives. Isn't that good news? I find that to be incredibly good news. Because let's just be honest. Most of us, most of the time, at best, have mixed motives. And so Jesus here is kind enough to entertain it, not in the sense of he's like going to play with it, but he's entertaining it in a sense of like, again, calling them and bringing them some clarity. Be encouraged that Jesus called, works through, and deeply loves those who have mixed motives and are still not 100% clear on what he is doing. So I think this might be really good news if you're in one of two places. One, you've been following Jesus for a while and maybe you feel jaded right now. Or maybe you're new to this thing and following Jesus. Either way, you feel like, I still need to figure some stuff out. I feel like I'm not where I should be. Jesus, again, his disposition towards you is not to condemn you. It's to call you and bring you clarity. His kindness and his patience in this text are absolutely noteworthy. Because this is how kind and patient he is with you and me. Verse 38, and he said to them, you do not know what you are asking. And then he goes on to ask them this question: are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? And they said to him, we are able. This is an interesting section here, but this leads to point number one. Following Jesus on the path to greatness in his kingdom requires suffering. It requires suffering. One of the best things you can do when you get to the Bible is to ask questions. Again, you could talk to me and Darren. We preach often and we prepare very differently in many ways, but here's one thing we do have in common. We ask a ton of questions when we come to a text. So this is just a helpful tool for you as a disciple of Christ. When you get to the Bible, I'm not saying question it in the sense of whether or not it's true. I'm saying ask questions as you read it. What does that mean? Why did Jesus say that? Or what does that imply? Or what does that word mean? Be inquisitive as you study the Bible. And so as I was being inquisitive this week, one of the questions I asked was, what is Jesus really asking here? What does he mean when he asks them, can you drink this cup and can you really take on my baptism? Well, he's really asking this, or this actually should lead to some other questions. The other question should be, what is this cup that he's referring to? And then two, what is this baptism he's referring to? So let's answer the first one first. What is this cup that Jesus is referring to? Well, the answer is it's the cup of the divine wrath that he would drink that would save his people from their sins. It's actually referred to later on in Mark, I believe, chapter 14, in which Jesus talks about this cup. And it's often referred to in the Old Testament that God's wrath is like a cup that's going to be spilled out upon those who deserve judgment. And so Jesus is saying, can you drink the cup of God's wrath? That's the context in which we see is going on here. And question two, what is this baptism that Jesus is referring to? Some important context. Jesus has already been baptized. He's been baptized for quite some time. He's hanging out with his disciples now. But he's saying, are you going to be able to be baptized with the baptism I will be baptized with? I read that. I'm like, that's weird, Jesus. You've already been baptized. He's not talking about dunking underwater. The word baptism is often referred to in the Old Testament in particular, highlighting this idea of being overwhelmed by disaster and danger. And if you think about what baptism is for the believer, it's a death. It's an interesting celebration that we do it's one of the sacraments, one of the two sacraments we have as believers, to symbolize that we have died to ourselves and died to sin, died to our old ways, and that we've been raised to newness of life. But it's a celebration that we have died, yes. And so that there is a symbolism here in which Jesus is saying, you will have to take on a death. So Jesus is asking them this. This is maybe a modern day term of the way the question was asked. Are you willing and able to suffer and die for my sake? Are you willing and able to suffer and die for my sake? And here's the reality. Jesus is not just asking that question to James and John. He's asking that of Zeal Church. Are you willing to do the same? And James and John miss it. You know how I know they miss it? Listen to their answer. We are able. That seems like the good, right Christian answer, right? And yet if they understood the context in which Jesus was asking this, what they were signing up for, what he was signing them up for, there's no way that it said we are able. And so here's the good news of the gospel. You can sit there and you can receive that question and be like, absolutely not on my own. But by the grace of God and through the power of the Holy Spirit, yes, I can. You are not able, but he is able in you. Jesus said to them, this is continuing in verse 39, the cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, for it is for those for whom it has been prepared. Verse 41, and when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. Jesus here is prophetically speaking about what's going to come down the pipeline for James and for John. He's speaking prophetically about how they will suffer for his namesake in the future. And the Bible and history show us that what Jesus said is absolutely true. James, he was beheaded by King Herod. We see this actually take place in Acts chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. The church, the Pentecost happens. The church is born. The church begins to explode like this beautiful holy wildfire. And yet in the midst of that, one of the concrete evidences that God is on the move is the suffering and persecution of the church. And James is actually the first apostle martyred. And Jesus says, you're going to drink a cup and you're going to be baptized, just not in the way you think. And then we know that John, this is the same John who was exiled to Patmos and wrote the book of Revelation. John was persecuted and exiled to that island in which he wrote that book. And according to church history, based on some very reliable resources, it's not in the scriptures, but there's other people who've testified to the truth of scriptures that have added this thing in which we can take to be truth, is that John was actually boiled alive in oil and lived as part of one of the persecutions he faced. Like imagine being thrown in a cauldron of oil and letting that happen to you. And then living. And as a result, actually people came to faith. So we know he suffered a great cup and a great baptism. I want to be clear. Jesus is not calling James and John or you and me to take that same cup that Jesus took on the cross. But he is saying there's a suffering and a hardship and a difficulty and a death that we have to take on in being followers of his. This is what true greatness looks like. And I love this. Jesus makes very clear in this text the positions that we gain in the kingdom are not even his business. Did you hear that? He said, it's not for me to grant. What do you mean, Jesus? You're the King of kings and Lord of lords. You can do whatever you want. He's saying, no, that's my Father's business, actually. My Father's determined your place in the kingdom. I just know this, that in order to get there, you're going to have to drink and you're going to have to be baptized. You're going to have to drink and be baptized in suffering. So what we know about the kingdom is true, that the positions are clear, but it's the Father's business. In order to get there, we must suffer. The text goes on to say that the other disciples became indignant. They became angry, annoyed, and displeased. I can get it, right? James and John were the two like, hey, I know you like all 12 of us, but can we really get on the inside scoop of what's going on in the kingdom? And they're, again, missing the point. And the other 10 hear this, and they're annoyed and frustrated, understandably and rightfully so. I love stories like this because it reminds us that the disciples are human. If I was rolling with 11 other dudes, I would want to be the best one. Like, I'd be like, hey, I know you like all 12, but like, I'm your favorite, right? And this is kind of, again, what we see play out. And Jesus is so kind and patient to them in the midst of their craziness, right? Verse 42, and Jesus called them to him and said to them, this is all 12 now, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave to all. Point number 2, following Jesus on the path to greatness in his kingdom requires service. So there's a suffering that has to happen. It's a suffering that we often don't want to sign up for, but it's a suffering that actually does a work. It makes us more like Jesus. It's interesting, those of us who have suffered, especially this year, I know that we could make the argument that we've seen God more faithful, more clear, more consistent, more constant than maybe in the times when we're not suffering. And so just know this, that no tear is wasted, no suffering is wasted. It's all purposeful and intentional to bring you to glory the way God desires for you to be. And yet there is a great cost to it. Also know this, that your king is the one who suffered too. We'll get more to that in a moment. But he not only calls us to suffer, he calls us to serve. Jesus brings further clarity on greatness here. He says that the leaders in his kingdom must not be like this world. He says, listen, the Gentiles, they take authority and position and lord it over people. They actually kind of pay their dues so they can move up the corporate ladder, so to speak, so that they can have authority to then lord it over people and look down upon them. It's like sitting high and looking low on people. But Jesus says, not in my kingdom. The greatest among you must be servants. And he goes on to say, slaves. Here's what Jesus says about true greatness. True greatness equals service. True greatness equals service. He calls his disciples to be servants and slaves. This word servant, in Greek, it's diakonos. It's actually, here's what it means, waiting tables. So think about the next time you go to a restaurant, that's how you should be with Jesus and with his kingdom and his people. When you go to a restaurant, if you have a good waiter or waitress, what are they going to do? Hi, my name's so-and-so. How can I help you? And your glass is never empty. Your food comes out. If mistakes are made, they're kind, and they're positioned to serve you. And your wants and needs and desires, no matter how quirky and weird they may seem. But a good waiter or waitress looks beyond themselves to serve those at their table. Now, they're doing it for a payment and a wage. Guess what? So are you. Your payment and wage is just an eternal crown of glory that will never fade, be defiled, or fall away. This is the position of a disciple. This is not for those who are elite. This is not for elders. This is for Christians. For anyone who wants to sign up to follow Jesus, this is the position we take. I would make the argument that as elders and pastors, like we're actually called to this in a greater sense, because we're called to lead you guys in this. But notice, this is a blanket statement. For anyone who wants to follow Jesus, we must become like waiters and waitresses. Diakonos. Then he uses the word slave, which in Greek is doulos, bond servant. This is interesting. A doulos, a slave, is someone who is bound to and belonging to another. Selfless devotion. Listen to what Jesus says. He doesn't just call us. He does this in other places in Scripture. He calls us to be slaves of righteousness, slaves to the kingdom, slaves to him. Here he's calling us to be slaves to who? All. That's an interesting task. That's an interesting call. He's saying that we would actually become slaves to all. In other words, that we would be positioned in such a way that we see selfless devotion as the way we interact with every person we come in contact with, particularly the believers. But Jesus is calling his disciples, he's calling you and me to take a position in which we do not exercise and lord our authority over others, but we actually position ourselves underneath others for the sake of blessing them and benefiting the kingdom. It's actually practically, I'm not like trying to draw eyes on me, but it's why I wanted to serve you espresso this morning. Like I want to model this for us, right? And to live out like it's better when we make it about others. There's delight and joy. I got a lot of pleasure out of making you hopefully decent coffee this morning. And kids, hot chocolate. Like there's something about doing that that actually makes us more like Jesus and more in tune and tapped into his heart than maybe anything else. It's this idea of considering others more significant than yourself. So the road to greatness looks like service. Jesus lands the plane in this text by saying this in verse 45. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. If Jesus had a mission statement for his life, this is it. Point number 3, following Jesus on the path to greatness in his kingdom requires sacrifice. Jesus states boldly and clearly right here why he came to earth. He came to do 2 things according to that verse, serve and give. And I would just make the argument that's 2 ways of saying the same thing. Because how does he serve? He gives himself, particularly as a ransom for many. Most leaders become leaders so that they will have others serve them. Right? We don't have to be alive for more than 5 seconds to realize this is true. Go into any area of our world, and that's what most leadership looks like. There's this like lag in culture where they're like, oh, best leadership is selfless leadership. I'm like, yeah, Jesus has coined this over 2,000 years ago. It's like, actually, it's the way that works, and the way everybody's happy is when you do it Jesus' way. Funny how that works. But for most contexts, the idea of leadership is actually about how can I elevate myself above other people so they can serve me and give me what I want and what I need and what I think's best. And yet Jesus became a leader so that he could serve others. Do you realize, like, why did the God of the universe, who spoke the stars into creation, who made man, why would he become a baby? Because he positioned himself to serve. He came to serve others, the lowly, the needy, the outcast, the broken, the weak, the sick, and the forgotten. And here's the reality. Amongst all the great and wonderful ways in which Jesus serves, which I could go into, but I promised you it'd be short. But I want you just for 3 seconds, think about the ways in which, in the Bible alone, it tells us that Jesus served others. Amongst all of those things, the greatest is this. He highlights the most significant one in this text, giving his life as a ransom for many. There's so many great things Jesus can do, but the greatest thing he can do is give you himself. And that's what he said right here in this text. Before he goes to do it, he's telling his disciples, he's telling you and me, this is what I came to do. To not just serve and give, but to give myself. Like, that is the greatest gift you can give someone, is yourself. And that's why Jesus, the greatest gift he gave was himself. And he did so as a ransom. What does that word ransom mean? The importance of this text kind of hinges on the reality that we understand this word, ransom. Ransom means a deliverance by purchase. A deliverance by purchase, or a liberation by substitution. Jesus giving his life as a ransom means he is a payment that sets captives free. He is a substitute that steps in on your behalf and mine so that you and I could go free. It's what 2 Corinthians 5:21 says when it says, he who knew no sin became sin that we might become the righteousness of God. Some theologians say that's the greatest exchange of all time. C.S. Lewis says it this way: the Son of God became a man so that men could become sons of God. It's this great exchange where Jesus, who deserved no punishment and penalty and wrath, became sin so that he could take that on, so that you and I, who deserved it all, could be liberated and set free. We must come to terms this Christmas season that we deserved hell and death, and our sin is a great travesty against the God of the universe. It has separated us eternally from him, and we were dead. And we are enslaved, and we cannot make that payment. We cannot set ourselves free. But the hope of the gospel is that Jesus gave himself as a ransom for the lives of many, so that we could be set free from our prison and set apart for the kingdom of glory. This is the great news of Christmas. This is the great news of the gospel, that Jesus has come to suffer, to serve, and to sacrifice by giving himself. And I think it's important that we end here because I just made the claim and the argument for us that Jesus is calling us to a path of greatness that requires suffering, service, and sacrifice, and yet it's the same road that he walked. And it's the same road that he's still on today, one in which he is leading us not just down the path of greatness, but to the path of himself. So when he calls us to do the same, please know this. Know that we are following his great footsteps and that he is actually calling us to this path because it is where he is. It's not where Jesus was. It's not just what Jesus did while he was here as a human. It's what he's still up to now. He's still on that path of greatness. And it's a path of paradox. What does that mean? Well, it's actually a path in which we die so that we can live. But Alex, you said it's suffering, service, and sacrifice. I don't want to do that. That's why it's paradoxical. That's why it doesn't make a ton of sense to the world, but it makes sense in the kingdom. You have to say no to self. You have to die to yourself so that life would begin to sprout up and bloom and blossom. It's what actually leads to joy, peace, hope, and satisfaction for your soul. So, Zeal family, Jesus is calling us to true greatness. And it is a narrow road, and few will find it. It's full of suffering, service, and sacrifice, and yet on this road, you and I will never be alone. He is with us. He's leading, guiding, transforming us into his image, and preparing us for the great glory to come in the next life. He has already pioneered the way through his own suffering, service, and sacrifice, and he is the suffering servant of Isaiah 53, who is a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He was pierced for our transgressions, and he was crushed for our iniquities, and the chastisement that was put on him has been put on him so that it would bring us peace. And by his wounds we are healed. So I have one final question, Zeal Church. Will you follow him on the path to eternal greatness?